mainstream working class Britain is becoming radicalised. Now, that may sound to you like a strange thing for me to say, but I have spent most of my life studying and being involved with and against, eventually, Islamist radicalisation in Muslim communities. And when people ask me what are the causes of radicalisation, I say the causes are legitimate grievances that are exploited by hardened ideologues, who then manipulate vulnerable young people by pointing to those legitimate grievances and radicalise them. Now, at no stage in the process of radicalisation is it suggested that the grievances are not legitimate. So if you look at Islamist radicalisation, whether it be the genocide in Bosnia, whether it be the invasion of Iraq, whether it be racism at home, or whether it indeed be the civil liberties violations that occurred during the War on Terror decade under George Bush and Tony Blair. These are all legitimate grievances, like Guantanamo, that people can point to say this is radicalising Muslims. In comes the hardened ideologue and exploits those grievances to manipulate the angry young teenage Muslim into a path of radicalisation. Why do I mention all this? Because Tommy Robinson has just been freed from prison. And Tommy Robinson is involved in this process of radicalisation. He and his supporters have some legitimate grievances that they point to, which end up radicalising themselves and the rest of their constituency. And if we need to understand the process of radicalisation here to understand how to tackle it, because the media silence around Tommy Robinson and why he went to prison and why he was revealed, or indeed the refusal to discuss some of the issues he raises, or indeed the desire to character assassinate the person that he is, won't make him go away, just as it doesn't make Trump go away. In fact, no matter how much we point to facts and reason in the case of Trump, you see Trump is very expertly online able to pander to his constituency. I believe this is a process of radicalisation. And I think a better way to address this would be, as we try and do with Islamist radicalisation, look to some of the legitimate grievances that the ideologues like Tommy and his followers are exploiting to continue building support for their cause. And if we understand those grievances, we can begin to understand the appeal behind some of what Tommy Robinson says. What are those grievances? Well, let me name three for you, just so we can begin thinking about the fact that it doesn't help us ignoring things like this topic of forced marriage that we're discussing. So let's look at grievance number one: visa entry to this country. How is it possible that in 2018 in Britain, somebody like Lauren Southern, who came from Canada, an alt-right activist, with whom I have many disagreements in terms of what she stands for, not least her zero tolerance on immigration policy. Yet Lauren Southern was held under UK Schedule 7 terrorism laws and denied entry to this country under our terrorism legislation. Lauren Southern's probably never even lifted her pinky finger to physically harm another individual, yet she was detained under our country's terrorism laws. Meanwhile, just in the month of July, Hassan Hasibur Rahman, a Pakistani cleric, came to this country and attended a so-called counter-terrorism conference, which had senior police in attendance, organised by the one-man band known as the Ramadan Foundation, headed by Mohammed Shafiq. And this man, Hassan Hasibur Rahman, has been on the record supporting death for blasphemers in Pakistan. So you've got a fundamentalist Muslim cleric allowed into this country, not stopped by our terrorism laws, attending a so-called counter-terrorism conference, giving out prizes to police officers who are in attendance for their counter-terrorism work while he supports death for blasphemers, yet a young, in her 20s woman, Lauren Southern, is held under the terrorism laws. And you don't see a contradiction here. You don't see a double standard here. That's grievance number one that they can point to. It's a legitimate grievance that needs to be addressed. A cultural blind spot to extremism coming from brown people. Grooming gangs is another one. For years and years and years, this was tolerated and allowed by a Labour council in places like Rotherham in the name of anti-racism. That is a legitimate grievance they point to, and the conspiracy of silence around it for years, that eventually the official government inquiry into it realised that there was a conspiracy of silence around it due to fears of racism. That's a grievance they point to. As I said, only today, The Times reports an article whereby a policeman called a charity called Karma Nirvana actually asking the question whether it was culturally acceptable for an Iraqi to be in a relationship with a 12-year-old girl because he claims it was culturally acceptable. What kind of ignorance leads to that question? Again, from fear of being perceived as racist. So that's another grievance there when it comes to grooming gangs and the abuse of young children. These are legitimate concerns they point to that the ideologues on the far-right populist side exploit, but it doesn't take away the legitimate concerns people have, and it doesn't serve us to ignore these legitimate concerns. Let me give you another example. Free speech. Yes, there was this rally that the populist right held, and Vanity Von Glow, a drag queen, got into all sorts of trouble for performing on stage at this rally and had multiple gigs cancelled. Yet at the same time, in the same year, in the same rough time period, you had Hezbollah flags being raised in London, flags emblazoned with a symbol of a terrorist organisation, and you had people like the head of Her Majesty's Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, having previously attended these sorts of rallies. He gets to be leader of the opposition in this country, and a drag queen has multiple gigs cancelled for simply speaking at a populist rally. This perception of a double standard. Now, whatever you think of the populist right wing and Tommy and his followers, Tommy, what he isn't doing is going around setting bombs off, blowing up civilians like Hezbollah does. And yet Corbyn can get away scot-free with addressing those rallies with Hezbollah flags raised behind him, and a drag queen who performs at a populist right-wing rally has multiple gigs cancelled and is punished for it. It's this perception of double standards, and in fact, in reality, the double standard there that is leading to the sorts of grievances that allow these people to recruit. So whether it's the Trojan horse scandal, the grooming gang scandal, the fact there have been zero convictions for FGM in this country, visas being denied to populist speakers, and yet people that are involved in fundamentalist Islam being allowed into this country, these grievances have to be addressed. And it doesn't help us if we ignore them, because if we ignore them and refuse to speak about them, and if we refuse to acknowledge that they are very real grievances, then the hardened ideologues on the populist right will continue to recruit, just as the Islamists continue to recruit when they point to Bosnia, Iraq, domestic racism and the war on terror decade and the abuses that occurred therein. If you want to stop radicalisation, you've got to not only challenge the ideology, but also look at the grievances.